Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your time. Today, we're going to talk about how we use DX tools at Salesforce, an admin's journey. My name is Samir Saini. I've been an admin for about 6 years, 2 of which have been here at Salesforce. I'm very fortunate today to be joined by Kim Mundelli, who's the Senior Director for Software Engineering for Platform DX. This is our agenda for today. So I wanted to walk you through a little bit about my journey as an admin and sort of like how I've transitioned into more of a DevOps role. Next, Kim is going to go through SFDX and how it supports the overall DevOps philosophy and framework. And then lastly, we're going to go through sort of like what a workflow using DX would look like for an admin and just some helpful tips. Before we get started, we do have to remind you to please make all of your purchasing decisions based on what's currently available today. With that out of the way, so what I really wanted to start with is I was asked to do this presentation because at Salesforce, we've gotten a lot of feedback that it's been a little bit of a tough road to have admins start to adopt SFDX. We wanted to clear up some misconceptions, and the product team actually asked me to talk and hopefully sort of share my story about how I've incorporated DX into my workflow and hopefully inspire the rest of you to be able to adopt it into yours. So like many of you, you've probably started becoming an admin by accident. Somewhere along the line at a role you had, someone tasked you with owning a Salesforce org. Similarly, I was working for a small nonprofit. I was given a brand new shiny org. I had no idea what I was doing. I was really just like cutting my teeth on this platform, making all of the changes in production. There was no sort of change management. There was also like nothing hosted on the org really, so it was pretty low risk. Low stakes. After some time, after a couple years of experience, I transitioned to a company down the street, which had a much larger org, a little bit more established. There were some complex integrations, but more importantly, I joined a team of admins and also one developer. And this is sort of like where I learned about change management, using change sets, migrating your changes through different environments. Meanwhile, so the 3 of us admins would be using change sets to make all of our to push our changes, while the developer was using Ant to push his. So while it's a better process overall than making those changes in production, it's still not ideal because you have 3 admins making changes on their time and in 3 different swim lanes. Meanwhile, the dev is using a completely different tool set, and it's really hard to sort of track who was doing what, and there's a lot of conflict. Ultimately, I complained to my boss about it, and oftentimes when you complain about something, you're the one who gets tasked with fixing it. So my boss was like, all right, well, starting tomorrow, you're the release admin. All the changes go through you. So my process that I implemented was, okay, so all the admins, we're all just pushing one change set. One change set with like all 500 components. And while it like made things better, the process is still flawed, right? Not every sandbox has all of the same configurations made in it. Everything is like, there's a lot of drift, right, between all of these different environments. And so, yeah, there was just like a lot of conflict, and it was just very challenging. But, it did help me to start thinking about, how do we follow like a formal software development lifecycle? Like how do we start getting better at pushing new features and changes to the business without interrupting their day-to-day? So after a couple years, I moved on. I was very fortunate to be hired here at Salesforce as an admin that is now managing one of the largest internal orgs. The org hosts the App Exchange, the partner community, Trailblazer community, along with the events app that you're all using at Dreamforce. So now the stakes are a lot higher. I can't start using the same workflow that I was using at my previous roles. I work with 20 to 30 devs. They've already have an established lifecycle process that they follow, and I just can't keep running with change sets. And now when there's a conflict, right, we could bring down the sites, just have more unplanned interruptions overall. And so one day, I was just kind of tired of having to ask my devs to make changes that, as an admin, I make all the time, right? Like, I make them in a lower environment. I don't think twice about it. I'm very used to how I work. And typically, a lot of admins kind of work in a silo, right? Like, we like to think that we're the experts. I mean, we kind of are, but overall, now I'm just working in a much more complex environment and just a much larger team. So the team uses Git and Jenkins to deploy their changes, and they've automated this, right? So they start with their dev environment, they make the change, they check it in, right, into the source control, and then this automatically kicks off jobs that push the changes through the different environments. This is a very intimidating process for an admin. As an admin, we have to learn to work with different stakeholders and different parties and things like that. So one day I just sat down with one of them and I was like, okay, I really need to learn how you work, and I need to be able to make my changes in the same way that you guys deploy your code changes. And so my favorite part about being an admin is being able to make my own changes along with these other 4 things. We're the business analyst, we're the release manager, we develop new processes and push new metadata in our, through configuration. And lastly, we manage users and administer or access. But so thinking about this, right, these are the 4 things that to me are what I've focused on throughout my journey as an admin. And it turns out that just like I fell into being an admin, when you put all these things together, you're actually positioning yourself to become a DevOps engineer. 6 months ago, Kim's team came to me and was like, hey, we really think you're very conscious about, pushing your changes in a consistent and more efficient way across different environments. We really want you to think about being a DevOps engineer for us. And what we've seen is that at different companies and here at Salesforce, we're seeing that this DevOps role is really like the next evolution or it's a natural evolution for an admin. Just like you could be, some people decide to go down maybe more of an analyst route when they're ready to move on from being an admin, or they go full dev. DevOps is also becoming another very viable career path for admins. And so now Kim is going to talk to you about how SFDX really, or how you can use SFDX to really drive that DevOps sort of culture for your team and or for your company.
Great. Thank you, Samir. All right, so for me, pain or not feeling pain is a great motivator to change. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about the pain that some of us may be feeling, and then that'll help us motivate a good conversation around DevOps and DX. So I'm guessing that a bunch of us have had experiences with this or have seen our colleagues have these kind of experiences. I know I've heard horror stories about folks who have been deving within a sandbox and working on something that was critically important, really complex, working for a month or two. They come into work, they're getting close to pushing this to production, and then they found out that somebody accidentally refreshed or blew away their sandbox, and their work is gone because that sandbox was their source of truth. Other examples I think folks have seen is that you've deployed a change to production, and maybe a second later, a minute later, a month later, somebody else deploys their change to production, completely bashes yours. And it could take a while to even find out exactly what's happening. Now you have to start digging into it. Why are my customers so upset, et cetera? Along the same lines, you could imagine that you've put forward a change. There's some other swim lane that's put forward another change you hadn't realized until maybe a pre-prod environment or maybe prod, that your changes don't work well together. And again, you have that same issue of there are critical business processes that are failing because the code is conflicting with each other. So now you've got code in production that is not working as you're hoping it would. And maybe you're in a really complex org, and maybe there's a lot of swim lanes, a lot of changes. It's hard to know, how do you roll back to get to a good state? And that could take, that rollback, even if you know how to get there, it could take time to get there. Meanwhile, you're dealing with a lot of this pain, right? You're dealing with your customers are frustrated, your business stakeholders are frustrated, maybe you're losing revenue. What you want to focus on is pushing roadmap out, getting value out. You can't do that because you're stuck debugging, and your time is precious. This can't possibly be how we want to spend our time. All right, so I see DevOps as a solution to these classes of problems. So to me, this is like a guiding light of how do we both efficiently push change to production and keep a high focus on quality. And what we'll get into, so this is our philosophy, and we're going to talk to you about the building blocks, the tools that are available. The tools aren't the goals. This is the goal. You have efficient ability to get new code, new metadata out to production with high quality. All right, so let's just dig into what does DevOps mean. And to me, the most critical aspect of this is we just assume no magical thinking. Everybody here in this room, you work really hard. You're really intelligent. I hope I am too. I still make mistakes. So let's set up a process that gives us good guardrails so we're not at risk. The next thing is we want really repeatable environments. We want to work in environments that mimic production. We don't want to work in an environment that has old, crufty code in it that maybe without realizing you relied on to start making some of your metadata changes, right? That now you're just fighting environmental changes instead of pushing out great roadmap products. And how do we get there? We make sure that our metadata is in a repo. The metadata is not in some sandbox, or excuse me, the source of truth is not in a sandbox. The source of truth is not in production. The source of truth is in a repo. And that means that you're able to regenerate an environment over and over and over again with automation. Automation's our friend, so that you're able to recreate what production looks like in a very clean, repeatable way. This means that you're able to iterate really quickly because you are not fighting environmental differences. And so it again, results in really high quality work that's really efficient. And it means you're able to find bugs really early in the process, right? You're not having to find bugs like an issue with two different swim lanes that aren't integrating well, where maybe you don't find that when you're in pre-prod or prod, right? This enables you, if everybody is sharing that same source of truth, you're able to find issues of conflicts incredibly early. And finding bugs, finding conflicts really early in the process is the cheapest possible way you could find bugs. I joke with my devs that they could find conflicts even before they start writing metadata, right? They could find conflicts by talking to the business stakeholders, talking to their product owners, and digging into the requirements, right? You know, the earlier you're able to push a focus on quality, the cheaper it is. And then the great thing about having the code in the repo is that it enables really high trusting collaboration. So I'm guessing a lot of people here really care about what is the data model for those workflows that are really critical for you to get done. And I would imagine the last thing you want to find out is in prod or pre-prod, oh, that data model changed, right? And it changed in a way that doesn't support my workflows. But if you have access to a repo and you're seeing the changes that are getting pushed really early on, you're able to say to that other Scrum team, hey, I care about this. I'm one of your stakeholders. Let me give you a little bit of guidance about how those data model changes should work. And then you have those conversations really early. All right, so I think just to say, having a source of truth in a repo, having automation to be able to push that source of truth out repeatably, gives you those repeatable environments, solves this kind of class of problems. So Salesforce offers a whole bunch of tools. We're not going to go into all of it, but I want to make sure folks are aware that there's a lot going on here. We only have 40 minutes, so we can't get into everything. But Samir is going to also talk to you about what are some fantastic resources you can get your hands on, because there's a big old world out there. So we're going to dig in a little bit more in terms of the CLI, Scratch Orgs, and CI/CD. All right, so we've chatted a little bit about the source of truth is in the repo. And the great thing about this is that it gives you version control. It gives you a history. It gives you the capacity to get back to a known good state if you need it. And it gives you the capacity to start from a very, very clean, good place that looks like production. And again, you're using a repo. That gives you a great tool for collaboration across all of your different teams, all your different swim lanes. Scratch Orgs. Can I ask, who here has heard of Scratch Orgs? Great, great. So I'll just give you my 15-second overview. So the Scratch Orgs are it's the emptiest, most lightweight possible shell that you could push your metadata and your org shape into. And what I really like about this is the idea of, if you're working, again, in a sandbox, your sandbox over time could have a lot of drift. You can imagine something where you're working in a sandbox and maybe we've decided, oh, this direction that we were going in, it doesn't work. This isn't the right way to go. And now you've got some abandoned code in there. But 3 months later, do you remember all that? Now you're starting to rely on code that isn't actually anywhere near production, right? And you'll end up with bad conflicts as a result. So if you work from a Scratch org, what you're always getting is the cleanest possible state. You're not getting any of this cruft. The CLI, command line interface. So this is just great, powerful tools that let you dev, test, and automate. And to give you a sense of what is included here, it's creating Scratch orgs, pull push of metadata and data, and the ability to run and automate tests. CI/CD, we've talked about this a little bit, this idea of if a great thing about keeping, or a great way to keep the code that is in the repo super clean is if you make sure that you're not checking in any code into that repo that hasn't passed a series of tests. And there's no one perfect right way. I would say take a look at what your own world looks like, take a look at what your teams need, and create automation for testing that really works for you. So for some of my teams, we won't allow anything to get checked into our repo unless it's passed through all of the unit tests and all the functional tests. And we do one round of browser UI testing. But we find that browser UI testing is really expensive. So we allow a check-in there, but that later on we have nightly builds that check all of the browsers to make sure that none of our code has broken, IE11 and so on. So take a look at what the needs are of your teams and figure out what needs to be automated to really support your teams. And CD with continuous deployment, so you want to make sure that you've got really, really solid build automation. Anything that you're doing where people are touching with their hands, where it's manual intervention, that's a source of risk. Everything that you're able to do that is just through metadata deploys, now what that means is you're going to have one environment after another that looks the same. You've removed a whole bunch of risk, and that is a beautiful thing because it keeps you from fighting fires. And then VS Code and its extensions. I think the extensions are a great way. Maybe you really want to get into the CLI, but you're not ready to be all in yet. The extensions will give you a way to test out the power of the CLI without having to access the CLI directly. All right, so I know that I've seen this kind of workflow both internally and among some of our customers, where you could have a dev team that is using sandboxes for their dev, QA, UAT. And those sandboxes are fed by a repo. And it may be that the admin is getting refreshes, and then they're deploying through change sets. I think this is pretty common. And again, part of the pain comes from the fact that we don't all share the same source of truth. So if we've got our admin hat on, and Samir talked about how everybody here, you're wearing multiple hats. So we're going to talk about the admin hat. We're also going to talk about the release manager hat. So if this is the hat that you're wearing sometimes, what is great to do is get on that same train, get on that same source of truth repo. And if you're able to, start accessing scratch orgs so that you can get into that cleanest possible environment. And the devs should, as much as they're able to, it's great if the devs can as well. All right, so now we've got a different hat. Now we've got the release manager hat. And the thing I would just point out here is, to me, a huge part of the value of the release manager is all about how do we have an eye on quality? How do we build in great guardrails so we're not battling our environments? And what I think of is try to get as much of your quality in as early as you possibly can, right? So you're running unit tests and you're automating the running of unit tests, F tests, UI tests as early as possible, and it's automated. You're using one source of truth. And I think the thing that's really important to notice is, again, anytime we have to do high manual touch, I've definitely seen some teams where for them to figure out if there's going to be a conflict in production, they'll have all the teams come together in kind of a cab, and teams will talk about what they're doing. And again, we are smart, we're hardworking, but holy cow, that is a place where there could be a lot of, I don't remember everything. I don't necessarily know to bring up every possible thing, every possible file that could have gotten touched. It's a very risky process when it's manual like that. So as a release manager, a great thing to do is to push to make sure that those conflicts are unearthed really, really early through automation. All right, last ideas I'll leave you with is if you're able to get engaged with Scrum teams, if you're not already, I think it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal for us to have Samir engaged with Scrum teams. And you'll find out about the things that you care about really, really early. You're embedded with them. You're hearing about those data model changes really early. I have another team where our admin says, I really care about these stories because I'm uploading the data for you guys. So I want to make sure that data model works for me. And that's fantastic. The last thing we want to do is build something that causes her pain. So get engaged with the Scrum teams and understand how they work. Understand, like for us, we use Agile Scrum kind of processes. We have stories where we care about acceptance criteria, definition of done. That's not the most important thing. The most important thing is for you to find out how your teams work and get engaged with them. And I would say if you're used to working solo, there could be a little bit of a mind switch because the dev teams, what they're based on is this idea of we've all got each other's back. So if I'm deving on one story, I've got a QA who's looking out for me, and they're looking over my code, they're doing code reviews, they're poking at my code. And I could do the same for them, where I'm taking a look at their data model changes and saying, hey, consider something different, right? So we have each other's back. It's a really great positive thing that helps us de-risk what we're pushing to production. And then if any aspect of DX feels, it's not comfortable, it's not, it feels like it's too hard to get started on, a great thing to do is to get a buddy on one of these Scrum teams. So with my dev teams, what they're really used to is starting from a place of ignorance, because you may get pushed on a new tech stack, you may get pushed into using different tools, you may get pushed into a totally different code footprint that you don't know anything about, and it's super normal for us. And so we always expect, yeah, I won't know anything about this, I'll have to figure it out. And we rely on each other. So we'll ask each other questions, hey, could you sit with me and explain to me how to use these tools? Or could you walk me through the architecture that's going on this team? So they're used to that. So if you go to them and you say, can I sit with you and shadow you for 2 hours? They'd be like, yeah, of course, normal. Or at least that's how it works with my team. So I would consider that if you want to learn the CLI, but it's frustrating, get a buddy.
All right, thanks, Kim. So hopefully by now we've piqued your interest a little bit, and it was a lot to take in, I'm sure, but now we want to really show you where you can get started. So before I show you what my workflow looks like, I just want to share a couple thoughts that I wish people had told me when I was going down this road. The first being just look at how you're working right now. Think about what are some pain points, maybe some areas of inefficiency, and just choose one that's maybe the easiest to improve and just start there. A lot of times also as you go through this, you'll find out that you uncover more areas that you can improve than you even realized. This whole thing, DX, it's a very iterative process. So it's not like, oh, okay, I made this a little bit better today. Tomorrow you might find a faster way to do it or a more consistent way to do it. And then so once you identify that pain point, like set a goal of something that you're going to improve. For me, page layouts are like the perfect low risk way to start using DX to really check in that metadata for your page layouts. And then everyone moving forward starts from the same point, right? So you're not coming back. Every time you look at it, it looks a little bit different. There's some new fields that are there. There's some fields that are gone. So yeah, that was really a great place for me to start tooling around. And it's low risk in the sense that, yeah, it sucks. You can't find your fields, but you're not breaking some fundamental functionality by modifying a page layout. Next, yeah, start simple. I think there's like 5 very basic commands with the CLI that I'm going to show you that I think are really all you need. I think it's also important to just understand how it works. And then after that, then you can start to figure out what that DX flow looks like for you. Yeah, I already touched on using a simple use case. And then lastly, yeah, you don't need to memorize every command. I'm going to show you why. And also, just remember, it's okay to get frustrated. It's a new process. It's iterative. It's going to take a little bit of leaning on your devs for some help, but that's okay. Just like Kim said, we all start from a place of ignorance, so it's okay to find that buddy to pair up with. So now I'm going to show you what my workflow looks like using DX. So first, we use after you install the CLI, I use DX to log into all of my sandboxes now. This is a sample command. There's a couple of different ways you can log into your sandboxes depending on what your auth setup looks like. Next, the first step is, or after you've logged in, the next thing to do is to create a project on your local machine. And so what a project is sort of setting up that scaffolding for you to be able to do your work. The project translates your org's metadata into files that you can, into XML files that you can then push into your source control. And so what I'm trying to highlight here with these 2 images is that the first one is using a command on the CLI, and then the second one within VS Code using the extensions that Kim was talking about earlier. I'm doing this without having to remember a command for that, right? And so this is why you don't. It looks intimidating at first, but there's a couple different ways for you to work. So here, after you've created that project, now you can start to retrieve that metadata. So here I'm showing you a command, and then I'm also showing you using the UI how you can pull that metadata down. So once you have the files on your computer, then you can start to manipulate them. What I often do is I clone them, and for example, I will clone an existing custom objects XML file, and then I will use that as a template to deploy a new custom object. And so after you're ready to deploy your metadata and you've retrieved it on your machine, now you can push it back into your source control. And this is using the GitHub UI also. So here, it automatically tells you which file was changed. I don't have to remember the path on my computer and the 50 folders I'm storing it under. And then it's also showing you here what that item is that you changed. So here it's I'm removing a field off of a page layout. So I can go through my whole DX workflow without even really remembering without remembering those specific commands. So it is a lot of stuff that we talked about today, but these are all the resources that I use to get started. The help and training docs just to get that CLI installed on your machine, a few trailheads, but also externally, Code Academy has a really great tutorial on using the CLI, and GitHub also has a really great tutorial, but Pluralsight covers all of this in really great detail. There's some awesome lectures on there if your company has a subscription. All right, so that's our presentation, and Kim and I will be hanging around for some questions.